Okay, so let me try this again. Like I said, I've been trying to do this for a long time, and I've been very, very unsuccessful. Because, yeah, I've almost just gotten away with my system just by a fluke. However, I have been running it in higher and higher scales for longer and longer and longer, and it does keep on working, so gotta be doing something right. This is basically where I started my oil. We make rubber and plastic, about 30-70% split. As you can see, we produce way more rubber and plastic than we use. And we have way more refineries to deal with the oil residue than we probably need. But I found this, in this case, with the byproducts, more is always better than less, right? So this petroleum coke we make gets burned by our 34 coal generators. Now, those coal generators only burn coke. When the coke runs out, they stop burning. So basically, those 34 coal generators only provide us about a gig or two on our 15 gig grid. And like I said, they run intermittently depending on the supply, right? So this is just providing us extra power, which is somewhat consistent. It's got a bit of a pattern, depending on if your amount of coke being produced is sufficient or not. So you can rely on it a bit, but not 100%, you know? We just simply do this with the coke because it is easy. And it does get us that power, which does help. Because the way power works, depending on how you have your power set up, now all of my power is interconnected. All of my factory, it's all on one grid. It's all interconnected, even the geothermal. So everything, aside from the geothermal, runs at the same efficiency, right? Running at about 70-75% right now. So that's true for the fuel generators and the coal generators. And once I add them in, the nuclear reactors as well, right? So the more power I use, or the less power I produce, will raise that production number, which actually raises the amount of fuel it burns. So that's how you can kind of control how much of your byproduct's getting used, right? Now, I find this strategy of starving your power generators to be the most effective. Build more coal generators than you can supply, and only supply them with coke, nothing else. I'm gonna do the same thing with fuel soon as well. So over here, we actually did have a time where I was producing too much coke. So in an effort to relieve that, I turned some of this residue into fuel and put it into some of these fuel generators. And they burn it quite effectively, as you can see. None of these pipes have filled up. And once they run out of residual fuel, these guys will cut off. Funny enough, though, this system has been quite efficient from when I built it till now. I'll quickly try to show you guys where I'm generating the bulk of my power right now and what I'm doing with the rest of my byproducts. There's about 3 oil nodes at that setup we've just left, and I've got all of them under max usage. When all of that plastic and rubber is producing at full rate, we're using up all the oil on site there. So we've started making rubber and plastic at a second site as well. But at that site, we're not making any petroleum coke. We're doing all residual fuel and feeding it into our main fuel generator grid. Thanks to the pipes, and since it's liquid, using height and pumps, you can sort of give certain liquids priority over others. So all along here is all oil to fuel, and then polymer resin to plastic. So this is where we make the bulk of our fuel, or the bulk of our power. And we make way more fuel than any of these could possibly burn at 100%. That might not be true anymore. Watch your face. But we're right now in the midst of setting up nuclear power. So we're producing fuel for this for now, but once we have the nuclear reactors up, we're going to have another 20 gigawatts of power on the grid. So my plan is to turn off all of this oil to fuel production and just use these generators to burn the residual fuel that's being produced at this setup way out here. So essentially, the strategy for dealing with byproducts is just feeding them into starved power producers and then just keeping your power grid to the point. I found the sweet spot to be a minimum of 66%, and then, you know, a maximum of like 80 or 90. Honestly, I think 75 is the real sweet spot, because, like, unless you're a real pro factory designer, it's really hard to get an absolute consistent power consumption going on. And 75 is a nice aggressive one, so your spikes, it won't trip the breaker. And then when you dip down low, if you're just at like 70, 75, you should be burning things like residual fuel and petroleum coke at a decent enough rate that it won't cause you any grief. So you just got to think about this when you're scaling up your power, right? I fully expect when we turn on our nuclear setup, which is going to be about 8 reactors, 20 gigawatts worth of power, we're probably going to end up putting several of those reactors on standby for a while so that we can keep that sweet spot of power while we build more machines to use up more, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's basically I think all I could possibly explain on dealing with the oil byproduct so far. I'm hoping that once I've got my nuclear setup up and working and I've made all the changes I'm talking about here, I'll have a more concrete system that I can maybe share with you guys in better, less scattered detail, you know? But yeah, it's crazy. Oil byproducts are nuts. And there is always the obvious shortcut of just doing a solid byproduct like coke, throw it right into the sink. You can make it just as easy as that. However, I am with you guys in the idea of, you know, dealing with the byproduct, trying to figure out a system that works. So this is what I've come up with, and you know, so far 250 hours and pretty big factory later, it's worked. Like, I've never had my plastic and rubber production stop for very long due to byproducts. So yeah, just basically every time you tier up your power, just keep your previous generators and use them to burn the byproduct. That's like basically all you can do with them. Got to explore a lot of other options, though. That's the thing with the oil byproducts. So many other options. The alternate recipes introduce a lot of funny usages. But the byproducts are always a pain. I was going to use the original aluminum recipe that uses coke to make the aluminum ingots, but I ultimately decided against it. So if I want to make more aluminum than I have the coke for, I can't directly make coke. I'd have to make more plastic and rubber and use up more plastic and rubber to get more coke. Unless you get like an alternate recipe to make coke, but then you've kind of gone full circle and you got to ask yourself what you're doing. And I don't know, it's the whole thing just kind of. So yeah, that's going to be a good video, man. Can't wait. It's going to be the best tutorial video yet.